Hi, everyone. Today's novel is a real heart-wrencher. The plot thickens when our heroine, Dylar, discovers her beloved Gabriel's hidden angelic heritage. What's truly heartbreaking is the fate of Gabriel's mother, who, in her fight against vampires to protect the werewolf race, falls into an eternal sleep. Chapter 17. My wolf and I were rendered speechless, our minds reeling from the revelation. The notion of those abhorrent vampires, freely roaming in daylight and preying upon innocent victims at will, sent chills down my spine. Even more terrifying was the realization that Gabriel, my fate-given mate and the alpha of our pack, held the key to the vampire's salvation. The weight of this knowledge seemed to press down upon me, suffocating in its intensity. I struggled to reconcile the Gabriel I thought I knew with this new, earth-shattering information. His secretive nature and the burden he carried suddenly made sense, but the magnitude of his angelic bloodline was beyond anything I could have imagined. Had he spent his entire life, his years as alpha, anticipating the moment when the vampires would come knocking? Raising a less unsettling gaze bore into me, but I deliberately turned away, focusing instead on Gabriel. His conflicted expression mirrored the turmoil I felt within. "Why didn't you tell me?" I finally managed, my voice barely audible. The weeks I had spent in his house, repeatedly questioning him about the vampire's interest, now seemed like a cruel joke. As his mate, I was supposed to help shoulder his burdens, yet he had kept this monumental secret hidden. Regret washed over me as I recalled how I had initially pushed Gabriel away. If only I had understood the depth of his struggle, perhaps things could have been different. Gabriel's eyes met mine, a storm of emotion swirling within them. How could I just come out and say something like that? He replied, his voice thick with unspoken words. I sensed there was more he wanted to reveal, something still held back. "Is this why you keep pushing me away? Why you thought you weren't supposed to have a mate?" I asked, momentarily forgetting Raziel's presence, too caught up in my own thoughts to feel self-conscious about my vulnerability. To my astonishment, Gabriel's face contorted with pain, and he turned away, leaving my questions unanswered and my heart aching for the truth. I blinked at him in disbelief. Was he seriously refusing to answer yet another question, even after I had just learned his deepest secret? "You're not going to answer that," I snapped, my whirlwind of emotions threatening to overwhelm me. He remained silent. To my frustration, you reveal something like that about yourself and then refuse to explain how it relates to us as mates. I clenched my fists, unable to prevent my rising anger. Gabriel turned halfway to glance at me. "Dylar, no, don't do that. Don't use the patronizing tone." I really was losing it. Gabriel glanced over at Raziel, and to my surprise his look was almost pleading as he locked gazes with his grandfather. Raziel sighed, looking resigned as he walked over to me. He gently planted his hand on my forearm. His touch was almost soothing instead of disarming. "Dylar, do you want to take a walk with me?" Raziel asked, eyes boring into mine. "I have a really lovely garden out back, and almost nobody ever gets to see it." He gave me a significant look. My eyes flicked Gabriel, who had started to pace in agitation. I really wanted to continue to pry him with questions, but at the same time I was feeling claustrophobic and stressed. Perhaps I could use some fresh air. I attempted to take a deep breath, forcing down my anger. If Gabriel wouldn't tell me things, maybe I could get them out of Raziel. "Okay," I replied shortly. Raziel grinned that brilliant, disarming smile of his before leading me towards the back of the house. I glanced over my shoulder to see Gabriel sinking back down onto the couch, placing his head in his hands. My wolf suddenly itched to comfort him, but I held her back. He was not getting that sort of treatment until he stopped hiding things from me. Part of me knew I was being a bit unfair and demanding, but I had waited long enough. I had handled the angel thing without fainting. How much worse could it get? Lost in thought, I barely registered the grandeur of the rest of Raziel's house as he led me to the back door. When he opened the door, though, I stared in awe at the massive garden stretching out behind his house. It was indeed lovely, as Hed put it. Flowers of all shapes and sizes bloomed on either side of us as we began to walk down a well-kept path that led through the middle of the garden. There were vibrant splashes of color everywhere I looked, and I marveled at the effort it must have taken to maintain something like this. Raziel did not speak as we continued down the path, and I examined the vast variety of plants around us. A sweet aroma of honeysuckle wafted through the air. I didn't know a lot about flowers, but I was pretty sure most of them weren't native to the area. Raziel must have had a lot of time to cultivate his gardening ability. We turned a sharp corner, and my eye fell upon a large gurgling fountain. A circular space had been cleared around the fountain, and there were small park benches on either side. The architecture itself was impressive. The fountain looked very old, like the rest of the items in Raziel's possession. He led me to one of the quaint benches, indicating that I should sit down. Raziel himself remained standing, taking a few steps closer to the fountain, seemingly lost in thought. I couldn't help but admire his profile as he stood there. Raziel really did have elegant, regal features that suited his angelic bloodline. I recognized some of them in Gabriel, too, although Gabriel had a father's coloring. I felt slightly intimidated sitting there, alone with a holy being that was probably older than anything on the planet. "Your garden is beautiful," I finally said, wanting to break the silence. I wondered if Raziel had brought me out here to tell me anything in particular. "Thank you." He turned to face me, studying me with a contemplative expression. I tried not to shrink away from his penetrating eyes. "You have to forgive Gabriel," he said after a long pause. "I know he can be difficult to talk to sometimes. He's one of the most stubborn creatures I've ever met." Raziel sighed, turning his eyes back to the fountain. "But he handled this whole situation the best way he knew how. I just wish he would have told me sooner. I'm his mate, even though he likes to pretend otherwise." "He doesn't like to pretend otherwise," Raziel contradicted me softly. "If it were up to him, he would accept you in an instant. He cares very deeply for you." I felt my face heating up at the intensity in Raziel's words. "He doesn't exactly show it," I muttered, embarrassed. "Trust me, I've been around long enough to read emotions. Gabriel has already grown attached to you. To him, you're practically a miracle. He never thought He defined his mate, or that he even had a mate at all." My eyes widened as I remembered some things Gabriel had said, similar to Raziel's words. "Why?" I asked, puzzled. "I mean, he has werewolf blood. All wolves have mates." Raziel sighed and sat down beside me, leaning against the back of the park bench. "I will tell you this, I know you think Gabriel is cold, distant, and heartless. I've checked in on him over the years and observed him. I know he has treated outsiders less than favorably. His pack killed some members of my pack for minor territory infringement. They took away almost half of our land. Before I met him, I hated him. As an outsider, I could understand why you felt that way, but from what I know of him, in Gabriel's mind it is all just survival. His pack is bigger than yours and needs more land. They are stronger, so to him it is survival of the fittest. If you have more land than you can use, the Black Mountains pack is going to take it for themselves. It is a selfish way of thinking, but they didn't always live so comfortably. When Gabriel was younger, they relocated a lot. Many wolves in their pack died from starvation and rogues. Gabriel was hardened at a very young age. Now he will do anything for his pack members. He couldn't care less about outside packs." I sat there, absorbing all of this, trying to understand. My pack did have an incredible amount of land and we'd always lived comfortably. That didn't excuse Gabriel's actions, but it did shed more light on the situation. I remembered what my father had said before I found out Gabriel was my mate. He had called Gabriel a visionary to the Black Mountains pack. I couldn't forgive Gabriel for the pain he had caused us, but in his position, many alphas might have done the same. "There's something else you must know," Raziel continued after a moment. "Gabriel seems uncaring. and I know he often doesn't treat you the way a mate should. He does have reasons for this that he can discuss with you himself. But before you ask him, you have to realize what his childhood was like. Gabriel's father, David, was heartless, relentless, and cruel. He fought to expand the Black Mountains Pack's borders at any cost, and most of your Pack's issues with them occurred while he was alpha. For David, though, it was different. He didn't care for the welfare of his pack like Gabriel does. He only cared about power. I noticed that Raziel's expression had darkened considerably. He clearly was not a fan of Gabriel's father. Then again, neither was I. He extended this sort of behavior to his son after Gabriel's mother died. I blinked in surprise, curious about her. They figured she was out of the picture because she had passed away, but Gabriel had never talked about her. She was half angel, according to Raziel, so I was burning with curiosity. For now, I held down my questions until Raziel finished his train of thought. David was very cruel to Gabriel. He pushed him but never rewarded him for his efforts. He was often physically abusive, but most of his lingering effects are on Gabriel's mind. David caused a lot of emotional damage. He never loved his son because of his angelic blood, and David drove it into Gabriel's mind relentlessly that he would never have a mate because of his lineage. He began telling Gabriel this even when he was but a child. Raziel's tone was bitter and there was vivid sadness in his expression. I could only sit there, staring up at him in horror. I had known that Gabriel's father was not a good person, but I never would have thought he could have been so horrible to his own son. Why would he tell his son that he was doomed to live life without a mate? Every werewolf dreamed of finding their mate one day. It was something to look forward to. It was every werewolf's source of happiness. To take that away from one so young was despicable. I looked down at my hands, intertwined in my lap. Gabriel knew that he had angelic blood, that he was different, coupled with his father's words. It was no wonder he had been surprised I existed. I felt a surge of sympathy for my mate. Still, I was confused about one thing. If Gabriel had seen me as such a miracle, why had he put forth every effort to drive me away? Why did David hate Gabriel's angelic bloodline? I asked, deciding to leave the more personal question for later. I also wanted to know what had happened to Gabriel's mother, but worried that would be too sensitive of a subject with Raziel. How could I approach such a thing? Raziel's mouth tightened into a hard line, his eyes becoming guarded. For some reason I felt like I had trespassed on a taboo subject. That's not something I should tell you, he replied carefully. Apparently I was getting all the answers I wanted. I sighed, slightly frustrated. A few things just weren't adding up. I knew that Gabriel's father had died a few years ago. Rumors said he'd been attacked by rogues. Gabriel's mother had never really been mentioned. Plus, there was the one picture I had seen of the beautiful woman, where she had looked strangely withdrawn standing next to her family. Something was definitely off. A few minutes passed in silence. I idly watched the bubbling fountain, enjoying the fragrant smell of the gardens and the chirping birds overhead. The sun was beginning to climb in the sky, reflecting off the clear water. If I lived here, this would be a wonderful place to come and think. Ready to go back, Raziel said after a while. I know Gabriel doesn't want to be here too long. You have a lengthy drive ahead of you. I nodded in confirmation, following his lead as he headed back to the house. Questions clouded the forefront of my mind, along with an unsettling mix of emotions after hearing so much about Gabriel's past. It was no wonder he never talked about his father. My parents had always been loyal, protective, and kind. I couldn't fathom how any parent, especially an alpha, could be cruel to their own child. When we entered the sitting room, I was surprised to see Gabriel standing upright, staring at us. He had an intense, agitated look on his face. Everything about him was tense. His arms were folded in front of his broad chest. When I walked in after Raziel, Gabriel's eyes met mine and he gazed at me for several long seconds. I couldn't fathom his expression. He seemed to be searching for something. I shifted under his dark scrutiny, and after a moment I saw resignation, clear as day, enter his eyes. "I want to see her," he said shortly, shifting his attention to Raziel. I frowned. Now Raziel was the one that seemed uncomfortable. "Gabriel, I want to see her. When we spoke all those years ago, you told me you had her. I have the right to see her." His jaw was clenched, every muscle on edge. I had absolutely no clue who they were talking about. My wolf was equally confused. Raziel sighed, lowering his head. "As you wish." His eyes met mine. "What about Stylar?" Gabriel looked reluctant as he spoke. "She knows everything else now. She might as well come along." I perked up in surprise at that, hardly able to believe he was going to let me in on something. Judging by the mood of the two men, though which, it was the most positive subject. Razzie lied him for a long moment, as if sizing up his intentions, before he nodded. "Very well. Come along. Only if you're sure." "Gabriel? I'm sure." He spoke coolly, although I got the impression my mate was trying to mask any emotions. We exited out of the back door again, although this time we took a sharp right in front of the garden and followed a different pathway. We traveled to the edge of the garden before exiting into the open, revealing the entirety of Raziel's green, well-manicured lawn. I spotted a thick fringe of trees in the distance, to which we seemed to be heading. Gabriel walked just behind me, but he seemed distracted and remained silent as we trudged along. The pathway had ended and I felt guilty treading on such beautiful grass. It reminded me of a much larger version of one of my human friends' lawns. Humans always seem so intent on keeping their plot of land nice and tidy. After several minutes we entered the trees. The forest floored appled in shadow. There was a narrow space cleared through the undergrowth, although branches still reached out to scrape at my legs. It was slightly chillier out of the morning sun's rays, and a light breeze whispered through trunks. I cowled and helped but feel a bit nervous as we continued our journey. I wasn't sure where we were going, but for some reason I had a sense of trepidation. It was mostly coming from my wolf. She whined softly in the back of my mind as we emerged from a particularly thick clump of trees. Before us stood a large, marble structure, finely crafted and imposing. It looked to be about 8 feet tall and was the size of a small room. The marble was pure and looked relatively unscathed for the words carved on the side of the building. They were in a language I did not recognize. In front of us was a large door, and I felt my unease increase tenfold as we approached. I had never seen one of these before, but I knew what it was. A mausoleum. It was the type of tomb which humans buried their dead in, so I had never been in front of one, but had read about them. I stopped in place, looking up at the building. Who was buried here? Even more importantly, why were we here? I felt my skin prickle as my mind began to work overtime. My wolf did not like this place, as it was unnatural for werewolves to be around something like this. We did not bury our dead in mausoleums. "Here," Raziel said, indicating we stop. His face was drawn, his expression taut. Razzie looked like he was trying to rein in some strong emotions. I focused on my mate. His face looked like it could have been carved out of the marble before us. So tense was his expression. Slowly, he took a step forward to the door. My wolf did not want us to get any closer to the strange burial site, but I ignored her. Gabriel had said we could come, and I desperately wanted him to reveal what he was hiding. With one motion, he grabbed the handle on the door and heaved it open. It made a loud grating noise as the mausoleum's depths were revealed. Straightening his shoulders, Gabriel stepped in first. Swallowing my fear, I followed, Raziel close behind me. My werewolf eyes quickly adjusted to the darkness gathered inside the building. Above us was a very small hole, placed strategically so a narrow beam of light filtered into the room and fell upon the coffin in the center. I heard Raziel pull something out of his pocket behind us and he quickly lit a match, using it to ignite a nearby torch. Although the door was still partially ajar, the torch did a lot more to the mausoleum. Inside was a long, flat table, on top of which rested a coffin. The coffin itself was intricately carved and ornately detailed. It looked as if a lot of effort went to its making. However, the craftsmanship wasn't what caught my eye. What startled me was the fact that the coffin had no lid, nothing encasing the corpse inside, and it was completely exposed to our view. I couldn't prevent the small gasp from escaping my mouth as I saw the figure within. Dark hair cascading around her shoulders, regal features, pale face completely peaceful in death. She was beautiful and perfectly preserved, decomposition not affecting her in the slightest. It was Gabriel's mother. I heard Gabriel's sharp intake of breath as he hesitantly placed a hand on the coffin. Raziel. He stepped forward, his eyes burning with the intensity of emotion. For some reason I almost felt as if I was intruding, as if I should back out and head back into the forest. My eyes were wide with shock as I stared at her. Gabriel gazed down on his mother's still face, a multitude of emotions flickering across his features in mere seconds. I felt a sense of loss swell powerfully in my chest, and I put a hand to my heart in confusion before I realized the feelings were not mine. I was feeling an echo of Gabriel's pain across our growing link, much as he had felt flashes of my pain before. I stared at him, taken aback by the intensity of his feeling and how well he was managing it. He could conceal his overpowering emotions better than anyone I had ever met. Gabriel took a step back from the coffin and instantly I felt the pain diminish as he tossed me a dark glance, clearly trying to recover. "This is my mother," he said, his voice completely devoid of feeling. I already knew that, as I had snooped in his room, but instead I just nodded. What was I supposed to say? He stared at me for a moment before turning back to her form. Raziel was looking down at her with pain etched in his features, and I remembered with a jolt that she was his daughter. "How is she still?" Gabriel began, indicating her still healthy-looking flesh. "She isn't completely dead," Raziel replied. I put my hands to my mouth to prevent any sound from escaping. If she was dead, why was she in a mausoleum? Gabriel was clearly wondering the same thing as he glared at his grandfather in complete disbelief. "What? She might as well be. Though, Raziel continued, infinite sadness in his eyes. "What the hell are you talking about?" Gabriel snapped, clearly not liking being left out of the loop. "When I came and told you about her death, I didn't tell you the full story. I was waiting until now." He sighed, and I could sense the agitation rolling off of Gabriel in waves. The vampires didn't kill her. They didn't catch her by surprise. She knew they were coming after her. It was part of the reason she left your pack. I stood there, flabbergasted, absorbing the words as they came. They were dangerously close to capturing her and using her blood to walk in the sunlight. She was working with a human geneticist to try to figure out how she could alter her DNA so the vampires couldn't use it. Alter her DNA? She wanted to kill her wolf. Raziel's eyes were grave as he spoke. I recoiled in absolute horror. My wolf howled in agitation and I tried to keep her at bay. How could any werewolf do such a thing? Our wolves were part of our souls. To try to kill our wolf would go against every fiber of our nature. Trying to control my reaction, I stared at Gabriel, who looked equally horrified. "Why?" he began, but Raziel cut him off. "She was half angel, Gabriel. She was as in tune with her wolf as you and Skylar are. Killing her wolf would leave her with pure angel blood, which the vampires couldn't use. It was still a huge sacrifice, but one she was willing to take to protect your race from Cain and his vampires. She was taking a medicine, bit by bit suppressing her wolf. It was working. Then, one day she got caught by Cain's right-hand man, Antonio. As a last-ditch effort to prevent herself from being used or tortured, she injected herself directly with the formula. It effectively killed her wolf." He looked down at her form, closing his eyes as pain coated his features. What she didn't realize was that her werewolf DNA was completely intertwined with her angel DNA, and the medicine could not separate them. One cannot live without the other. The angel part of her was undamaged, and is still alive today, but it cannot go on living without that part of her soul. Her wolf. So she remains here in perpetual sleep, unable to fully live without her wolf and unable to commit to death while angel blood still runs through her veins. He trailed off. I stared at the figure in complete horror. So she had killed her wolf, and now she was doomed to lie there in a mausoleum for the rest of eternity. It was a horrible fate. Gabriel stood rigidly, absorbing the news. I couldn't fathom how much this must be affecting him. Why didn't you just kill her? He finally said, voice thick, instead of just leaving her there to live in perpetual sleep. I could never kill my own daughter, Raziel said coldly, and while some of her DNA, the angel sighed, remains undamaged, there is still hope. Her wolf cannot live with the amount of formula she injected, but there is the possibility that it cannot truly die, either, while the angel in her lies. Her wolf may just be in a comatose state. If I could find something to bring it back, if it isn't truly dead, Rebecca would live again. It was the first time her name had been spoken. Rebecca. It was fitting, I thought, as it sounded like another biblical name. Gabriel was silent, lost in thought. But seems like to many ifs, he finally murmured, the words barely discernible. And leaving her out here, alone in this tomb, is just unnatural. I come visit her every day, sometimes numerous times a day. What was I supposed to do? She's my daughter. Gabriel, do you honestly think I haven't spent every waking moment agonizing over what to do with her? Funny. She didn't agonize over what would happen to me and my father when she abandoned us. I stared at him in shock at his heartless dismissal. Raziel's face hardened. She only ever wanted to protect you, Gabriel. She left when she got wind of the vampires so they would never find out about your existence. Her only hope was they didn't ever learn you'd been born. You were angry that she left, but she did it to protect you. The least you can do is hope that she has a chance. Gabriel growled, low in his chest. You have no right to tell me what to do, he said coldly. Not everything she did was selfless. Raziel shook his head slowly. He looked angry, the first time I had seen him that way. I will give you some privacy, he said shortly, before abruptly turning and exiting the mausoleum. Gabriel and I were left in thickening silence. I could sense his vast array of intense emotions. He continued to stare at his mother's form, jaw clenched, eyes flickering in the torchlight. I wasn't sure what to do. My wolf sensed that Gabriel needed me, but he hadn't too willing for me to touch him the last time we were alone. I cautiously took a few steps forward until I was standing right next to him. I felt a prickle of electricity as our arms brushed. Looking down at her this close, I could see that she was truly dead. Rebecca was as sallow as a normal corpse. I held my breath and attuned my ears to see if I could detect any signs of life. After a few seconds I heard it, a heartbeat. Very slow, agonizingly slow, but there nonetheless. There was the faintest rise of her chest and a near, silent whisper of breath as she breathed. Her breaths were few and far between, and it was unnerving standing so close to her in such a state. It was as if she was in some sort of deep coma, I supposed, where she didn't need food or water to go on living. The angelic bloodline was incredible indeed. All of this was nearly beyond my comprehension. I'm so sorry, Gabriel, I finally said, keeping my voice soft. I tried to put every ounce of emotion I could into my tone. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other. A few more seconds of silence passed before he spoke, voice heavy. It's because of her that we can't be together. You know. I twisted to face him, blinking in surprise at his bluntness. I had thought he would continue avoiding this subject. It was outside of her control. But if my blood is anything like hers. Gabriel trailed off, still not looking at me. What do you mean? What happened? I asked softly, almost scared to push him. He indicated Rebecca with a jerk of his head. Look at her. Skylar, really look at her. Do you notice anything out of the ordinary? I frowned but did as he asked, roving my eyes over her figure. Aside from her current state, I asked, confused. Look at her as a werewolf. As my mother, was his short reply. I examined her again, almost painfully slowly, breaking my eyes over every inch of her. Her skin was smooth, unblemished, still youthful. She was garbed in a sequin gown, dressed up in a similar manner as human corpses. My eyes trailed across her prominent collarbones, her smooth neck. I frowned. There was something missing on her neck. Something every mated werewolf female had. Wait, she was your father's mate, right? I asked, tentatively. Awareness was pricking at the back of my mind. Gabriel nodded curtly, and I continued so. Where's her mating mark? The scar caused by the mark of her mate's canines was noticeably absent. It never faded and never truly healed, so her unblemished neck looked strangely out of place. It's gone, he said. Gabriel had tensed again, and for some reason I felt my wolf's agitation suddenly skyrocket. What do you mean it's? I started, but he cut me off. It faded. As soon as my father marked her and she grew pregnant with me, her mark disappeared. I could only stare at him blankly, not wanting to make the connection. Slowly, Gabriel turned to face me. I felt my stomach plummet as I saw the look in his eyes. They were burning with agitation and contained a deep sadness, intermingled with resignation. Angels don't have mates, Skylar. Mates are for werewolves, not any other species. The central reason that werewolves have mates is to reproduce, to find the best suitable match to continue the bloodline. It's purely instinctive, and everything else, love, passion, trust, comes with the more human side of us, for lack of better word. Angel blood rejects the bond as soon as it's made. While my mother's wolf initially recognized the bond with my father, it was never as strong of a pull as my father felt. As soon as she grew pregnant and completed the central purpose of mating, the connection faded. I stared at him with wide eyes, disbelief overcoming everything else. I cowled in even form words. My father's feelings for her, however, did not fade. He had to suffer through the agonizing emotional turmoil as, day by day, she faded away from his consciousness. She fell out of love with him as her mark and the connection faded, but his mark remained intact. My mother's angel side completely took over her mental and emotional state. No matter how much she loved my father before, it was outside of her control as her bloodline rejected everything about the mating. To my father, it was as if his mate was slowly dying. As an alpha, every emotion was multiplied for him, and it all went against werewolf nature. The emotional agony drove him mad and turned him into a shell of his former self. His voice had grown cold, monotonous, but I could still see the pain palpably visible in his expression. I felt cold, almost numb, as I finally managed to form a question. You said it's angel blood that rejects the mate as soon as the mating is completed, so will the same thing happen to us as happened to your parents? I stood there, practically trembling, dreading the answer but unable to tear my eyes off of him. Gabriel's face contorted and he looked down at the ground. Every line of his body seemed as if he was in intense pain. There's a really strong chance that it will, he finally said. I clasped my hands to my mouth as a whimper of pain escaped. My wolf was howling in the back of my mind, drowning out any coherent thoughts that it had. I could feel unwilling tears welling up in my eyes, blurring my vision. It's why I tried to keep you at arm's length, Gabriel said, so softly I could barely hear. I'm fighting my wolf every second of every day, but I knew that if I gave in and we mated. He trailed off, but I caught the implication. But if you knew this from day one, why didn't you just reject me? Why did you make me come live with you? My voice came out pathetically weak and scratchy, but I didn't care at this point. My inner pain was so great I was barely remaining in a standing position. It felt like the world was crumbling down around me, and I wanted to curse fate for doing this to me. Gabriel's eyes abruptly met mine, and there was a bright fierceness in them. I never thought I'd find you, Skylar. When I did, you were the most precious thing it ever laid eyes on. You were a gift. I couldn't think straight. I wanted you so badly. When I left you that night, it was the hardest thing I'd ever done. But when I got back to my pack, I decided I would do the selfless thing and reject you. I knew I'd practically kill my wolf in the process, but I didn't care. And then, His voice broke and he rubbed a hand through his hair in abrupt agitation. Then I felt your pain when the vampires attacked. My wolf tried to take control and I nearly lost it. I couldn't just sit by while you were in danger. I found you and saved you. And from then on I had an overwhelming urge to protect you no matter the cost. I don't trust anyone else to keep you safe while the vampires were around. My wolf won't have it any other way. He had begun to pace back and forth while he spoke, while I was still standing there in mute horror. My wolf had subsided into painful, short whimpers. I knew from day one that I would have to tell you all of this. I decided to stay distant from you until you found out. My wolf had already grown attached to you, my miracle mate, and I was going to spit in fate's face by rejecting you. Once I told you everything. I planned on letting you decide for yourself if you wanted to reject me. And now we're here. He looked up at me again. I was selfish bringing you to my pack. His eyes glimmered with self-loathing. If I could go back and change it, I would. And I have the oldest vampire in existence after me. Even if we could be together, you'd constantly be in harm's way. I remembered his hurtful words from a couple nights ago. Now they made much more sense. I won't blame you for rejecting me. I can't bring myself to do that to you. I'm not strong enough to break our bond. Never had I heard Gabriel speak of himself as not being strong enough. It astounded me, seeing the pure vulnerability in his eyes. My mind was a complete mess. I was hurt and conflicted about him not telling me this at the beginning. But would I have done anything differently in his place? Could I have brought myself to reject a mate I had never dared dream of? Emotions whirled through my body, and it felt like my heart was being squeezed in a vice. I need some air, I choked out, willing the tears not to fall. I turned around and shoved the door open in my haste to get out. Blinking in the bright sunlight, I heard Gabriel following me, but I didn't dare look at him. My wolf was completely subdued now, not even trying to speak to me. A thought of our likely fate if we stayed with our mate had completely silenced her. To my surprise, Raziel was standing very close to the mausoleum. One look at my expression and a knowing look entered his eyes, along with a deep-rooted sadness. I shifted my gaze to the ground, unable to withstand the pity I'd seen in his icy orbs. But I began, not even sure what I was trying to say, still staring at the forest floor beneath me. When we first met, your eyes. I was referring to the silver sheen that had appeared in Gabriel's expression the night of the meeting, which indicated that his entire being was recognizing the missing piece of his soul. His mate. The silver discoloration only lasted mere moments as the bond was initially recognized, but I had seen it there nonetheless. I recognized you as my mate, Gabriel said quietly, affirming my suspicions, and I felt the pull more strongly than I could have ever imagined. Then how do you know the bond will break after we mate? You said your mother barely felt the pull when she met your father. I whispered, pain laced in my tone. Slowly, I turned to face him, and I could barely stand the raw emotion lingering in his dark eyes. It was Raziel that answered. Angel blood is dominant. Allure, the most powerful blood in the world. Gabriel is just as in tune with his wolf as you are, but he still has my bloodline. He looked at Gabriel, his eyes contemplative. I didn't know you had physically recognized the bond. That could help your chances a bit. He looked hesitant to say it, but I felt the tiniest flutter of hope. What are our chances? I asked softly. The angel turned to me. If Gabriel was an alpha, it's very slim. However, because he does have a powerful wolf and he did recognize the physical manifestation of the bond, it's 50-50, at best. So there was just as much of a chance that it'd eventually go crazy from loss after we made it as the chance that our mating would be successful. I thought grimly. My wolf whined softly, not liking the odds. It would be quite a risk to take. The thought of Gabriel fading away from me, our mental link being slowly severed. I cowled and it. Many wolves nearly went crazy from loss when their mates died. I couldn't imagine how I would be able to live without a mate once I had the mark. After your mother's mark began to fade, What happened to her? I dared to ask. Anything to distract myself from my train of thought. She grew quiet and withdrawn, full of guilt. She wanted to love my father again and rekindle the bond, but nothing would work. His mark would not stay on her skin. As my father grew increasingly disturbed and violent, she eventually left. I realize now she was leading the vampires away, but that wasn't the whole reason. She wanted to get away from us. Raziel began, but my mate turned and glared at him. You weren't there. Gabriel snapped. You didn't see. It was like her wolf wasn't there anymore. Like she barely cared about the pack. My father went after her to retrieve her, but he couldn't. When he came back, he said she'd shacked up with some human. He spit out the last word in disgust. The human geneticist was helping her. No, Gabriel snarled. She could have stayed. She could have at least explained to me what was going on. I was left with that. That bastard of an alpha. He took all of his pain and fury out on me. My mate was shaking with anger, and Raziel looked moderately alarmed. If I were in her position, I would have tried harder to be with my mate. Gabriel turned to face me, his gaze tinged with desperation. I would never leave you. I don't care how distant I felt. I'd never abandon you. He spoke vehemently, and I wanted to believe him. Wanted to think it would all be okay, even if my mark may never permanently reside on his neck. It literally was all or nothing. I could be perfectly happy with Gabriel, or I could slowly go insane as his body rejected the bond against his will. But right now, it was all too much to take in. Angels, bloodlines, living corpses, the severing of the mating bond. I just couldn't handle it. I was shaking with suppressed emotion, and I couldn't take any more. All of these emotions were going to burst out of me and release the floodgates. And I didn't want them to be there when I finally broke down and lost it. I'd always thought of myself as strong and reliable, the emotionally stable one. But right now I just wanted to be alone. My wolf was more emotionally distraught than it ever felt her. What I needed was time. Time to think everything through and figure out what the hell I was supposed to do. I couldn't think coherently right now. I didn't want to do anything rash. Gabriel was still staring at me, visible longing hovering in his eyes. Another time I would have been relieved to cease emotion from him, to hear him outwardly state how he felt attached to me. But now, it just hurt even more, knowing that his bond with me may fade if we ever tried to reproduce or fully complete the mating ritual. Trying to be with Gabriel could literally result in my soul becoming fractured. It was a terrifying concept. I want to go home. I just need to think, I said. My voice held thinly veiled exhaustion. I did not try to hide my pained expression from him. Thankfully, I had kept the tears at bay. But I knew they would fall soon enough. Which home did I want to go to? Deep in my bones. I ached for the company of my family and pack. I did. Gabriel's jaw clenched and his eyes were pained, but he nodded. Slowly. Well, Eve now then. His eyes flicked to Raziel, who looked resigned. I need to give you a few things when we get back to the house, but it's probably time for you to head back anyways. You have a long drive ahead of you, he said, glancing at me with something akin to pity in his blue eyes. I nodded, subdued. Without another word, we began to head back into the woods towards Raziel's magnificent house. I had all of my answers now, and Gabriel's strange behavior was thrown into perfect clarity. But the truth was completely unexpected and painted a grim outlook for my future with my mate. For the umpteenth time, I mentally cursed fate. I would never understand why I had been chosen for all of this. I wouldn't wish this on anybody else. But that still didn't prevent me from wishing it hadn't happened to me. Gabriel himself was everything I could have dreamed of, and I now knew there was a depth to him I had never perceived. But his bloodline, of all people, I had been matched with someone I could likely never be with. I felt a hollow echo of pain, and I couldn't be sure if it was Gabriel's or my wolf's at this point. I lowered my head, my dark tresses falling forward to obscure my expression from the others. For once, I let the horrible gravity of the situation simply wash over me. There was no denying it. I just knew. I had a really difficult journey ahead of me. Chapter 18. The trip back to the house was painfully quiet, but mercifully short. I was itching to get out of here, to get back home. Being near Gabriel was preventing me from thinking straight, because every time I was around him, I couldn't prevent the natural pull from drawing me to him like a moth to a flame. If I was going to make a decision, I had to allow mine a moment of perfect clarity. With my maid around, that would never happen. As soon as Ray entered the sitting room, Raziel made his way over to the box that he had brought out earlier. There are a few things I need to give you before you leave. Unfortunately, I'm not sure I have all of them here. If they aren't in this box, you'll have to make a trip to go fetch them. I must have looked puzzled, because he continued to explain. Over the many years IVE walked among humans, IVE collected hundreds of trinkets, some more valuable than others. Some of them are quite sought after. That being said, it wouldn't be wise to keep them all in one place. He was digging through the box now, pulling out various artifacts as he spoke. I told you before, vampires are demonic creatures. Because of that, they can be warded off by a holy object, something that has been blessed. Mouth twisting in contemplation, Raziel pulled something out of the box, a delicate necklace, adorned with a wooden cross. I blinked at it, recognizing the symbolic meaning of the cross itself. I'd always thought that most of the myths about vampires were false, including the one where they shied away from crosses, but perhaps I was wrong. Raziel approached me and held out the necklace. I took it lightly in a hand with some precaution. I had no familiarity with human religion, so the cross made me slightly nervous. Unfortunately, this is the only thing I have here that can really help you. It has never been worn before, so it's still quite potent. Put it on. He jerked his head, indicating I do so. Almost hesitantly, I pulled it over my head. The wooden cross was cool against my bearskin. This is similar to something humans call a rosary, although it is slightly different. Wearing it constantly is the best way to utilize its protection. I nodded. What did Raziel mean by potent? I voiced this question out loud. A blessed object's power won't last forever, as soon as it is put in use. As in somebody puts it on, its protection is in place, but the power will slowly drain from the object the longer it is worn. This necklace should protect you for a couple of weeks. Stylar, with it on, the vampires can't touch you, but as it gets weaker, Kane will likely find a way to get past it. I glanced down at it. Was I just imagining it? Or had the cross warmed slightly since it had touched my skin? The concept of it all was a bit over my head, but after everything I had learned today, I was beginning to just accept what I was told. I have other objects that can help protect your packs, at least for a time, but it will take me a few days to fetch them. They're at one of my more well-guarded places of storage. I distantly wondered just how many artifacts he had. How long had Raziel been on Earth? Anyways, I can't be away from my pack for that long. Gabriel grit out.
He was staring at my necklace intently.
Raziel frowned. Could you meet me halfway? Then I descend. As soon as IVE retrieved the items, Gabriel shook his head slowly but didn't say anything. I could tell he was weighing the risks of leaving his pack against the reward of having the blessed items. Gabriel, I'm not sure how soon this ritual is, but as it approaches, the vampire attacks will likely increase in frequency. This is the only protection I can offer, since I no longer have any of my abilities. I felt my heart skip a beat at the thought of vampire attacks. I couldn't bear to witness another scene like Riley's death. I hope that what you have is worth it. I could tell my mate's thoughts were following a similar pattern as my own. He'll contact you the usual way, Raziel replied, nodding in response. I wondered how they spoke when Gabriel didn't have a telephone or anything similar. What else do you know about this ritual? Gabriel asked. I noticed he was avoiding my gaze as much as possible, although for some reason I felt like he was ashamed. Instead of aloof like usual, I felt a small pang and quickly diverted my thoughts to the conversation at hand. Raziel's countenance had darkened considerably and he sighed heavily. Unfortunately, not much. It heard whispers and rumors of there being such a ritual, but it wasn't confirmed until the vampires started chasing Rebecca. Gabriel's shoulders tensed at the mention of his mother's name. So you can't tell us anything. Raziel's lips thinned. The one person, the only person I know of, who found out the more intimate details of the ritual is lying inanimate, locked inside her own mind. My mouth opened slightly in surprise. So Rebecca, she learned something about it. After she left her pack and found the geneticist, she devoted every waking second to studying the ritual and the vampires. Rebecca often endangered herself recklessly to get information. She wanted to know how to stop the ritual from happening. She was taking the medicine to kill her wolf more as a safeguard if the vampires caught her. Although, Mother Witch, honestly, I think she knew it was inevitable. Cain always finds his prey. I had to look away as I could see the sadness bright and visible in the angel's expression. Why didn't she tell you what she found out? Gabriel demanded. I saw a flash of sorrow in Raziel's icy gaze. She kept minimal contact with me at first. It was safest that way. She stayed away from anyone who knew about you. And she kept away from me because she didn't want the vampires to know where I was in case they caught on to her scent. She was too nosy at times, and eventually it caught up to her. His face hardened. Cain eventually found out that the hybrid he was pursuing was just fleeing him. She was prying into his deepest, darkest secrets. I could tell Raziel had no desire to talk about this. And truthfully, I felt a bit guilty. But this was my problem now, it was my family's problem. And both of the pack's problem too. We had a right to any information he could provide. Rebecca had a big breakthrough just before she died. It was important enough that she wanted to share it with me. In case she didn't make it, she told me to meet her at a certain place in 3 days' time. If she thought the vampires were tailing her, she wouldn't show up. But if not, well, Rebecca planned on telling me everything she knew. Gabriel had stilled. I could tell he hadn't heard all of the details of this story before. I felt pity for him, having to hear about his mother like this. Despite his mixed feelings for Rebecca, she was his flesh and blood. That had to mean something. I waited for hours at our meeting place, but instead of Rebecca, the geneticist showed up. He said that Rebecca knew the vampires were going to catch up to her. She was going to administer the rest of the medicine. I was worried that she hadn't calculated right, that it would kill her. The geneticist led me to her. His voice had taken on a bitter edge. I showed up right as she died. The vampires were I hid and watched as Antonio, the vampire that does a lot of Cain's dirty work, threw a fit that the hybrid bitch had killed herself. They took the human geneticist with them and left Rebecca there on the pavement, cold and lifeless. I couldn't leave her there. If I was mistaken. Raziel's hands were shaking as he relived the memory. I had to fight back a lump in my throat. I also noticed that he had a very strange expression on his face and his mouth had twisted as he spoke about the vampires leaving Rebecca on the pavement, almost as if he was holding some details back. I went to bury her, but it was then that I realized she had revived. Well, slightly. She had been lifeless for a short time, but her angel bloodline brought her back from the brink of death. I couldn't bury her while her heart still beat. However, slowly. You know the rest. I was amazed at Gabriel's composure as he spoke. Did the geneticist tell the vampires about my pack's location? Is that how they found me? Raziel shook his head. Slowly. Rebecca never told him about you. She never told anyone else. She couldn't risk someone being captured and tortured and telling the vampires everything. David said my mother loved him. The geneticist. That is, when he went looking for her, he found them. Together. His voice was cold, but I could tell Gabriel was just barely masking his anger. It did not miss my attention that he didn't call his father dad or anything endearing. I wondered if this was the reason hated humans so much, because of the geneticist that ended up with David's mate. There had always been rumors about the Black Mountains pack preying on them. The notion was unpleasant, so I brushed it aside. Raziel's face softened and I saw a flicker of sympathy. I could tell Gabriel noticed it, too, and did not appreciate the emotion. She didn't have a mate anymore. Gabriel. But if she did, you have to remember she was out of touch with her wolf. I felt my stomach plummet. So if Gabriel's mark faded after we mated, would he eventually fall in love with someone else? The thought was horrifying, and I vainly tried to overcome the rush of pain that struck me, judging by Gabriel's expression. He knew exactly what I was thinking. We need to leave now. I have to get back to my pack, he said shortly. Raziel seemed displeased with the turn the conversation had taken, but he simply nodded. With a glance at me, he indicated we led the way, and the three of us made our way to the entryway of his house. Gabriel opened the door without a word and strode ahead. I half-heartedly thanked Raziel for his hospitality and moved to follow my mate, but Raziel caught my arm, pulling me back. I looked up into his piercing eyes, taken aback as usual by the intensity of his gaze. Skylar, it is imperative that you do not say anything about this to anyone. You cannot speak of me, of Gabriel's lineage, and especially not about Rebecca. The vampires think she died that day. Just the only leverage we have, especially if we can wake her up one day and she can tell us everything. He didn't look too confident in the idea, but Raziel continued anyways. We cannot risk word getting out in any way, so it is just best to remain quiet. I knew my family would demand an explanation for why I was returning home so downtrodden and confused. Alpha Brit, too. I understood why this needed to be kept a secret, but I would have to be very careful if I was too reluctant to give information. And Alpha Brit caught on. He could just command the information out of me. Please. Skylar. Raziel laughed almost pleadingly. It was strange to think that an angel, a holy being, was practically begging for me to do something. If you tell someone, you'll only put them in danger. Cain will not shy away from torture to get the information he requires. He obviously knows about Gabriel, but others do not have to. Not until it is absolutely necessary. After a few more seconds of silence, I slowly nodded. He was right. I could only imagine Alpha Brett's reaction if he found out about Gabriel. Plus, it was my secret to tell. I could only hope that withholding the information would not put my family and friends in more danger. The drive home was tense, miserable, and agonizing. The more minutes Gabriel and I spent together, the stronger I felt the pull. Yet now that I knew everything, I didn't dare get closer to him. I couldn't. Not until I sorted everything out in my head. Sitting a few feet away from him was torture, and I was sure he felt the same way I did. I slumped down in my seat, resting my head against the cool window. My wolf emanated soft whimpers every few moments. I had never felt her like this before. It was the sharp, agonizing pain I would anticipate came with rejection. This was more of a slow burn, setting my nerves into an agitated frenzy. Knowing everything about Gabriel's past and knowing that there was a strong possibility he wanted me to do nothing to calm my hormones. Every time our close proximity would get the better of me, I would just envision the two possibilities that lay ahead, and that sobered me up immediately. I need, but despite my desire to be alone, thoughts continued to assault me. My wolf just cowled and wrapped her mind around the options. HES hours, my wolf said, desperation evident in her tone. Those were the first coherent words she had spoken in a while. I don't want to let him go. It's almost like a cruel joke. We get the most emotionally isolated and intimidating mate on this side of the continent. Then once we see past all of that, we learn there could be horrible consequences if we follow our instincts. I don't know if I can let him go, she said, softly. Wolves were proud and noble creatures beyond measure, so to hear her sound so subdued and resigned was unsettling to say the least. His mother fell in love with someone else after the bond faded. What if that happened to us? I bit my lip hard to prevent any sort of sound from escaping as I felt yet another pang in my chest. He said HED never do what she did. HED never leave us. I replied softly, somewhat uncertainly. He wouldn't leave. I'm sure of it. But if his mark faded, HED never feel about us the way we feel about him, was her quiet response. That was true. If his mark faded, that would mean the angel side of him was dominant, and thus rejecting us entirely. His wolf would no longer care for us. The way HED made the situation sound with Rebecca and his father. There would be no affection left if the mating pole disappeared. Gabriel's human side may never be capable of loving me if his angel blood repelled him even if he could. It would be a mere echo of what the mating bond entailed, and my wolf would be irreparably broken. How do we feel about him? I'm not even sure what I'm feeling right now. My eyebrows furrowed. I'd yet to take a step back and really examine exactly what I was feeling. If you decide to reject our mate, you'll never want another, she said adamantly. I expected nothing less. A wolf only had one designated mate their entire lifetime. Even if, years and years into the future, I found another, my wolf would never grow truly attached to them. I subsided into silence. I was going to lie to myself. I did have feelings for Gabriel. Strong feelings. My wolf was part of that, but a lot of them had developed from my human side. Seeing the depth and torment that hid behind Gabriel's dark eyes just made me want to help him in the way that only a mate could. But there was a risk if I chose to travel down that road. A huge risk. It was not just the risk of a broken heart, because I was a werewolf. It was the risk of a broken soul. It was like I would get hurt, but then recover years down the line. If his mark faded, I would never be a complete person again. It would be impossible. Rejecting him would be painful for both of us. It would be miserable, excruciating, but it would pale in comparison to the agony of his wolf slowly pulling away, of the bond fraying then breaking, of his wolf gradually losing recognition of the mating bond, at least based on how Gabriel had described what happened to his parents. Rejection caused an immense amount of pain, but I had never heard of it slowly driving a wolf to insanity, probably because most of the pain was instantaneous instead of drawn out. But if his mark didn't fade, my life would be complete. I knew I couldn't be anywhere near Gabriel when I was making such a decision. I couldn't think clearly around him. There were a couple hours of silence in the car, in which both of us remained trapped in our own thoughts. After a while, I began to doze off with my head resting against the window. Just when I was lingering on the fringes of sleep, Gabriel spoke. I'm sorry. My eyes shot open and I glanced at him in surprise. Gabriel was not the type to apologize often or admit fault. He was a proud alpha. After all, HED never tried to broach the subject in such a blunt manner before. I paused for a moment, chewing on my lip. It isn't your fault, I finally replied. He ran a hand through his dark locks, his calm and agitated mannerism. Yes, it is. My selfishness brought us here. I should have done the right thing for you from the beginning. Rejecting me, he meant. I didn't say it aloud, but I knew what he was referring to now. My reply was firm. Surprisingly, he glanced at me, taken aback. You were right in telling me everything and letting me choose. I deserve the chance to make my own choice. The thought was just occurring to me as I said it, but it made perfect sense. I understood a bit more now that I had time to think. I was as angry with Gabriel for bringing me to his pack, or even for taking weeks to tell me his secrets. At least he was giving me the choice, letting me decide for myself which path I wanted to take. Rejecting me from the beginning would have eliminated my free will. I knew that now. We fell into another thick silence. I could tell he was trying to push me or sway me in any way. He was letting me think. Unfortunately, I had a hard time doing just that in such close quarters to him. I couldn't help but notice the way his arm flexed when he shifted gears. His sculpted profile, the way his hair fell across his forehead. I was losing it. I knew. I was barely able to control my train of thought anymore. By some small mercy, after another long stretch of troubled thinking while afternoon transitioned into early evening, sleep finally found me. I lost myself in its enveloping warmth, pushing aside all of my worries and preoccupations for the time being. After such a mentally and emotionally strenuous trip, I needed to rest. Perhaps everything would be clearer when I woke up. When I next awoke, things were definitely not any clearer. I was surprised to note that I was lying on something soft in a horizontal position, Gabriel's couch. How did I get here? I frowned, confused. The last thing I remembered was the car trip home. I must have fallen asleep and Gabriel carried me in here. I lowered my head, feeling a blossom of warmth mingled with pain at the thought of him carrying me in here while I obliviously slept. My emotions were so muddled I couldn't make heads or tails of them. I sat up slowly, glancing out the nearest window. By the tendrils of light snaking across the horizon I saw it was very early morning. I must have slept for nearly 12 hours. I must have been extremely distressed just to sleep that long. At least what made it back sooner. I was somewhat surprised that Gabriel had decided to drive back all night with the threat of vampires, but I supposed he didn't want to leave the pack for too long. And I had the necklace for protection. Judging by my wolf's subdued mood, she was no more looking forward to saying goodbye to Gabriel than I was. However, it had to be done. I had to come to my own decision without any sort of influence from my wolf or hormones. I had to be completely sure I was doing the right thing. Almost absentmindedly, I traced the shape of the cross on the end of the necklace. It definitely felt warmer. Having it around my neck did make me feel safer. Even if it would only last a few weeks. The vampires could not touch me. I only hoped I could find similar protection for my pack. Assuming Raziel found what he was looking for. Seconds later, I heard the front door open and shut and Gabriel strode into the room, his eyes finding mine instantly. A slightly pained look crossed his face before he masked it under a blank EP8. "Are you hungry?" he asked a bit gruffly. He clearly was sure how to act now that I knew everything about him. I shook my head. I had no appetite, in fact. My stomach was churning. I had thought about it a lot on the car ride home and I wanted to return to my pack, at least to make my decision. I was sure Gabriel would not be happy about it, but he would understand. He had to. They hated me here, or at least most of them did. The animosity was intense. How could I make such a life-altering decision around so many unfriendly wolves? And if I admitted it to myself, being near my family would help. Besides, I needed to warn the pack about the vampires, at least to the extent that I could without breaking my promise to Raziel. They deserved to know. You returning home could put them in more danger. What if Cain comes for you? My wolf mused. He could come for me regardless of which pack I'm staying with. Both packs are in danger. I responded. It was true. And Riley's face in wide-eyed innocence flashed before my eyes. Then another horrifying thought came to me, he could come for my family to get to me, regardless of whether in with Gabriel or at home. I started feeling sick as I said it. It would make no difference where I was. Other wolves around me could get hurt, and I wouldn't wish that on my pack or Gabriel's. Regardless of how much they disliked me, they were his pack, and it would hurt him to lose more pack members. So therefore I didn't want it to happen. He can't touch me because of this necklace though, and Raziel is going to get the other items to protect our packs. We just have to hold out until then. Skylar. Gabriel cut into my thoughts, and I realized he had been staring at me expectantly. His use of my name made my heart flutter and I tried to ignore it. I was going to. I trailed off, taking a deep breath. I had to tough it out. Return to my pack, at least for a bit. His expression hard and slightly, but he seemed unsurprised. "If that's what you want," he said, a bit stiffly. "It is," was my soft reply. He turned away, shoulders hunched. "Your things are in the room across from your old one. I figured you wouldn't want to go back." He trailed off, but I understood the gist. "Thanks." I stood up slowly, fidgeting. It was uncanny how Gabriel could go from so open one day to completely closed off the next. Normally I wouldn't let anyone leave, especially after they came to my pack so recently. But I understand this is a special circumstance. His callous tone almost made me flinch before I realized he was likely hardening himself out of self-preservation. He cared about me. Right. He had to, or he never would have been this understanding. "Thank you," I mumbled. "Are you leaving immediately?" I sighed, staring at the ground. Why was I feeling guilty? Gabriel clearly took my silence as confirmation. "I will escort you to the border then. I'll meet you outside when you're done packing." Without another word, He had briskly walked to the front door and exited the house again. I cowled and helped the dejection I felt caused by the thought of leaving him. I could tell my wolf was not happy about it, but she understood what I was doing. She too was still adjusting to the newfound discoveries about her mate. Gabriel's emotionals as attitude did hurt, but not as much as it had before. As I headed upstairs and began to throw my piles of clothes into my suitcase, I knew he was probably just protecting himself. For all he knew, I could reject him any minute. In fact, judging by the way my clothes had been neatly folded by my suitcase, he had anticipated that I might leave. I stared at the clothes remaining to be packed, and I nearly felt like crying. His scent was all over the small bundles. He had clearly folded them with care and spent enough time in here that his scent still lingered. Had he spent all night curled up on my clothes? I swallowed hard and fought back tears. I rapidly threw all of my other necessities into the bag before exiting the room with haste. My hunch was probably wrong, but the thought of Gabriel sitting here, folding my stuff, was enough to nearly send me sprawling to the ground. Oh, how I wished it could all be normal. I met my mate outside and we set off at a brisk walk towards the edge of a village without a word. Part of me wished I could say goodbye to Eli, but at the pace Gabriel was setting there would be no time. You might see him again, my wolf said, thinking about returning here once everything had been settled. I knew that's what she wanted, a life with her mate. It was a risk she was probably willing to take. But was I? I shook the thoughts away. We shifted as soon as we entered the trees. Me with my bag of necessities again on my back, clothes tied to my ankle. Seeing Gabriel in his massively powerful wolf form was enough to set me on edge again. Every ounce of my own wolf pined for him, but she was far more subdued than normal, because she knew of the possible consequences now. I could see my wolf's sadness reflected in Gabriel's wolf steep orbs. While running as my wolf was usually a liberating experience, today my thoughts were much preoccupied. Gabriel ran near me, muscles rippling with every stride, but we made sure not to let even the fringes of our fur brush. There was no telling what would happen if our wolves took over. That run as my wolf was the least enjoyable of my entire life. Having something so close, that not being able to have it, was excruciating. Everything was amplified in my animalistic form. I took my anger out on the ground, pounding against it with my massive paws as we tore through the undergrowth. Finally, we neared the border. Gabriel indicated that we shift back. I assumed to say goodbye. Feeling downtrodden, I switched forms behind a copse of trees, throwing my clothes on haphazardly. I didn't want to do this. I didn't want to leave him, but I needed to think clearly. I had both Gabriel's future and mine in my hands, and it was not the time to make an impulsive decision. Too much was at stake. We approached each other in a small clearing, stopping a few feet away. It was mid-afternoon and the sun shone high above our heads, throwing everything into clarity. I was reminded of the first night we'd met, in a clearing similar to this one. I'm surprised you're letting me run the rest of the way by myself. I started the conversation hesitantly, trying to keep my voice light. If it weren't for that necklace, I'd never let you. I'm sure it would upset your pack if I joined you. But without that protection, I wouldn't care. Be careful, it'll be long past dark before you're home. His eyes flashed with worry, and he was still taut with tension. I sensed that he was putting a great deal of trust in Raziel's necklace by letting me be alone in the dark. That spoke volumes of the angel's wisdom, for Gabriel seemed to not trust easily, and I was sure it was a higher standard when it came to me. His mate. Don't worry. I'll meet up with Border Patrol. The vampires won't come near me. They'll be safe. I touched the wooden cross and felt its warmth, really hoping the blessed item worked. Gabriel sighed, looking down at the ground as he clenched his jaw. A moment of silence passed by. I don't want to let you go. Really, I don't. Everything in me is going against this. He closed his eyes for a second, but just this once. I know I need to step back and let you make your own decision. I stared at him, surprised yet again by his honesty. He must really have cared to put aside his alpha nature and let me be independent this once, when I most needed it. His eyes fixated on me then, and there was alarming intensity in them. I could tell everything he said was about to be spoken with a conviction. But you have to know this. Skylar, take your time deciding, and I will understand. If it's days or months, I will understand. Don't return to me until you've made a decision. And when I do see you, I want you to end this. You can either reject me and move on with your life, or you can accept me and become part of my pack. He stood there, shoulders tense, as I stared. But don't come see me unless you've made your choice. I can't take the pain of not knowing anymore. His gaze was scorching, desperate, and I swallowed hard as Gabriel's eyes bored into me. I gazed at him then for a long moment, and am sure my expression mirrored his. A series of emotions flickered between us then, along with the usual electricity of our close proximity. I tried to convey to him everything I was feeling through my eyes alone. I didn't want to use words because I wasn't sure how to put my feelings forth verbally. I just hoped and prayed that he could somehow know what I was thinking. I wanted him to know that this was causing me pain, too, and that both my wolf and I cared for him deeply. On the other hand, I was worried that articulating my feelings for him might make it even more painful, and I didn't want to cause Gabriel any more torment than I was by leaving. He didn't deserve it. We stayed like that for a bit, just staring into each other's eyes, silently conveying our emotions to the best of our ability. I wasn't sure how long I would be going without seeing him. I wanted to memorize the way he looked now, even if I would be seeing him again soon, because I knew how hard it would be to go without him for even a day. I kept the mental image locked inside my head before I nodded once. Slowly, I understand, I said, the words coming out a whisper. He nodded, once, the fire in his eyes dimming slightly. I turned to leave and took a few steps away. My wolf was whimpering loudly and I tried to force her down. I wanted to go back to Gabriel and embrace him, but I knew I couldn't. It would only make everything worse. Stay safe, Skylar, Gabriel said, so quietly I barely caught the words. I glanced over my shoulder to lock eyes with him. I will. Goodbye, Gabriel. I tilted my chin up with sudden conviction. I couldn't make him wait a long time. That would be cruel. Seeing him standing there alone, looking more dejected than I'd ever thought possible. I knew I had to make my decision fast. I will see you soon, I added, putting every ounce of honesty I could into those words. Then, without another look back, I turned and Ray entered the fringe of trees, heading home.